It is useless to resist. Don't let yourself be destroyed as Obi-Wan did.
Invisible Enemies from Bill Muir. A college student finds a pair of glasses which allows him to see demons.
It's like the devil is collecting souls and he's got like a zillion ways to do it. He's trying to destroy us. I can see things with them, Dre. Things other people can't see.
A number of years ago, I was in a little town, Darjeeling, on the northern boundary of India, where it met Tibet. And there were several visitors from various countries, and the hotel management decided it would be appropriate to give a little entertainment in the Tibetan spirit. So they brought in about a half a dozen Tibetan dancers with their masks and regalia to entertain. And among them was a little boy about 8 years old, a very cute, chubby little rascal, and everyone liked immediately. But when the time for the dance came, he put on one of the most grotesque masks you'd ever want to see. He really looked like a nightmare. And of course everyone knew it was the little boy. But during the dance he started and moved over very rapidly towards the audiences, always getting ready to attack them. And you should have seen the audience scatter. They all knew it was a little boy, but with the mask something happened. And a real spirit of ancient and primary fear moved in on those people. They actually, subconsciously, were terrified. On another occasion, I remember in the Japanese no drama, where the principal actors are masked. Many of the themes are highly sacred, and in the various performances, the actors are nearly always concealed behind these wood-carved masks that are well painted and decorated, but of course have no expression except that of the original carving. But under a careful handling of lights, particularly by the postures of the head in relationship to the source of light, these faces seem to change. And in moments of joy, the face really seemed to smile. And in sorrow, the face looked very tragic. And yet it was done with a wooden mask, but everyone felt it. The skill with which the mask was handled was the principal factor. In the southwest of the United States, we have a series of ritualistic dances by the various Indian tribes, the Zunis, Hopis, Navajo. These dances often include masked figures, and everyone knows that these masked figures are members of the local community. One of the men with a mask, very carefully developed, rather crude mask concealment, actually has two children in the audience. They all know that it's father, but when he dances toward them with a sacred pollen, they kneel instinctively as though he was a god. Something happens when the masks begin to take a part in religious ritual. Masks were used in Egypt, we know, in the temple mysteries. And even today, the various carvings and manuscripts of Egyptian origin show human beings with the masks of birds and animals. The Greeks used masks in their theater also. Nearly always a mask becomes a complete change of personality. If accompanied by adequate religious ritual, the mask becomes the secret of the development of a peculiar theological belief that there was a divine power in the mask, and when it was worn correctly and under ritual supervision, it brought a deity into contact with humanity. Well, in the course of time, the mask cults have gradually faded, but in many primitive countries they still survive. Then came another step forward in the study of human psychology. It is almost impossible for the average person to understand a completely abstract principle. It is very hard to visualize something that has no form, or to visualize an energy which is completely unembodied. From very early times, it became apparently necessary to present nearly all of the important truths of life symbolically.
The subject for the morning has been an object of considerable controversy. And back in the old medieval periods, there were very elaborate works dealing with magic. Magic sometimes uncertain, often unsavory in those days. Dark circles at the crossroads, haunts, various forms of black magic. All these finally gathered together under the general term of the astral light. The word itself, of course, is a perfectly innocent word. It really means essentially the effects of the stars, the convergence of star energies upon the atmosphere of the earth. We have a feeling of what they do when they affect us. By astrology and by weather and by numerous meteorological reports, we are informed, at least in part, of starry influences. But the effect of these influences upon the Earth's subtle atmospheres became the basis of an elaborate structure in magical thinking. A large part of magnetic healing is a result of energies being directed either by human consciousness or by various medicinal substances which carry these energies. Therefore, the whole planet is a vast organism, a tremendous, vital, dynamic structure, of which we in our daily living see only the outside and the surface. Beneath the surface is not just simply vast strata of rocks and volcanic forces. The invisible part of the earth is a tremendous being, for as the ancients put it, the earth is alive. The ancients definitely believed that the individual had a field of energy around him which could and did affect his life, that he also could poison this field with his own thinking, that he could destroy himself, and that phenomena such as drug addiction and alcoholism are aspects of the perversion of energies, that they are the sickening of the field of the imagination that surrounds the body. So we have a problem that goes back to the dawn of time as to what is imagination, how does it work, and is there a solid structure there, and how can we direct it, or how does it direct us? All this was part of ceremonial magic, became involved in the Kabbalah, and has more lately taken its place in metaphysical psychology. All of these elements, therefore, must be brought down to some level where we can use them, where we can find out what they're doing to us or what we are doing to them. At the present moment, the astral light is largely the product of what we have done to it. This field is a kind of field of the ghost world. It is the field of the invisible, but in a sense bound to the visible form of life. The Egyptians knew this ghost or phantom world. They also equated it with sleep and dreams, and believed in many cases, and perhaps correctly, that the dream life of the individual is not a mere fantasy. It is a fantasizing of something else. Anyway, we find in modern thinking there has come out of it all a kind of concept of magic. The magic of accomplishing certain purposes by dramatic intensities of the will. With magic also has come an absolutely necessary correlative, and that is ritual. This is another aspect of the same thing as the so-called ghost and dance and mask rites of ancient peoples. We have an exhibit in the library here now of the sacred masks of the Southwest American Indians. The Indian is perfectly aware of the fact that the mask is made by himself. He is perfectly aware of the fact that when he is wearing it, he is still himself. But when he combines the mask with himself, something happens. While he is wearing this mask, the astral light has stepped into his consciousness. Magic. He is no longer simply a member of the tribe. He is now some kind of a strange being conjured up by sorcery, conjured up by imagination, by ritual, rite, and symbol. Therefore, the Indian, I've been up where they put these dances on once a year, and a young Indian, for instance, with a mask, will be approached by his own family, his wife, his mother. But when he is wearing the mask, they will pray to him as a god. The moment he takes it off, he's back on earth. But in the midst of ritual, of magic, of transformation, something happens. Eliphas Levi, the French transcendentalist, says that these things are creatures of the astral light.
Julian Huxley once wrote that the basic elements in cultural transmission and transformation are psychological. This is how we change. Since time immemorial, high rituals have been performed to transform reality. Ritual, a spiritual psychodrama of conscious, deliberate actions taken to facilitate change. Changes to the whole of the environment people exist in, starting with the mental landscape of the people themselves, the place where our reality is first born a dream. Artist Sharon Devlin once bluntly described the true purpose of ritual as being a method to alter one's mind. It's a sacred drama in which you are the audience as well as the participant, and the purpose of it is to activate parts of the mind that are not activated by everyday activity, she said. The mechanics of change through mechanism, a rhythm to sync to, merge and flow with, a magnetic draw drawing one down the path toward transmutation. Rituals are vehicles driving home those ideas. the information, the data, the symbols, which, upon transmission, create the language by which new society members communicate after they are initiated. This new language imparts a new understanding through definitions the ritual generates, meaning pegged to signposts of its own self-referential process, even if the original purpose gets lost in the repetition of action. A ritual initiation introduces and inducts one into the way, a new way of life or worldview, a program to guide beliefs and actions, enabling the initiate to become a full and true member of the new society. Note that ritual is not always a conscious action. Not everyone partaking in a ritual is always made explicitly aware that they are participants. And yet still, new patterns of thought, of significance, are drummed in, conscious or not.
Ladies and gentlemen, this commercial is going to use subliminal advertising.
An initiation ritual typically involves 3 stages. See if any of this sounds familiar to you.
Because this is going to be transformative.
First, isolation for purification. The initiate is separated from the mundane. Did you know mundane means of the world?
Your school has been canceled, social events have been postponed.
The initiate is largely removed from the otherwise familiar persons, places, and things one is used to, in order to be cleared of them.
Stay home. Protect yourself. Protect our system. Stay home. Everyone must stay at home. We have to stay home because if we don't, stay home, stay safe.
Detached and insulated. Purged. Purified.
An extraordinary time when we have to stay home. We have to stay physically distant from the ones we love. How we can change our day-to-day life to avoid direct face-to-face contact. Try and keep yourself away from people as much as possible.
An essential element of this separation from one's typical environment is the suspension of the normal rules of living that one is used to. The normal way.
Normality, as it was before, will not come back.
Much of the initiate's senses will be commanded and regulated at this time. In other words, the majority of what the initiate sees, hears, smells, touches, and tastes, if directly related, is deliberately controlled. These senses may be bombarded, modified, limited, or deprived. But regardless, perceptions and experiences are ultimately overseen by the high priests and priestesses directing the ritual's performance, enabling new light to shine through a newly opened window of thought.
Every generation has a higher purpose. Ours is to stay home.
With nowhere else to go except where allowed, the insulated, isolated initiate may be forced to confront his or her own reflection, and inner shadows that have been ignored or buried somewhere deep beneath the average day-to-day suddenly become unavoidable. Triggers detonated. Another purge. Just as they involve surrender, initiation rituals may also involve sacrifice. Both the tangible that can be held in a hand and the intangible, such as behaviors, may be given up by requirement.
We're forced to change our routines, lifestyles, and habits, and many will be desperate for life to go back.
After all, for something to be given, something must also be taken. A token of submission, an ounce of blood, a pound of clay to be remolded.
Society will undergo a radical transformation.
Whether dramatically overt or deceitfully subtle, the ritual reinterprets. A new definition given. Training in the form of new behaviors and knowledge, including myths and codes.
Our world is filled with codes, pacts, user agreements, subliminal messages.
Necessary for new members to function properly in the society they are being inducted into, are all imbued at this time. Repetition is typical, as its use helps hammer the spell home.
The new normal? The new normal. We have to accept the new normal.
The wearing of masks may be required. Masking has traditionally played an important role in rituals of this kind.
Meantime, New York City has joined Los Angeles, advising residents to cover their faces. Well, we've already seen a big jump in the number of people wearing masks.
Well, they've announced that anybody who is flying on the plane is going to be having to wear a mask. See here right behind me, about half the folks in line at this market basket right now are wearing masks.
Oh.
Today there was a mandate that went into effect across the entire country to wear a mask.
Enabling and hastening the suppression of ego to help facilitate a death of the old identity before the identification with and manifestation of a new one. Disguised under a mask and hidden away, the initiate is more easily able to transcend the self, pushed further toward that invisible line between the physical and spiritual realms.
The fear that we have, the anxiety that we have, that's not just going to go away.
Trauma is another aspect of this kind of initiation, and most especially to personalize the fear of death.
People are dying, and nearly 6,000 Americans have died.
Sometimes the act of dying is even ceremonially role-played. The dark beyond the darkness. The yawning abyss.
I thought I was going to die, and I've never been faced with death before.
Only after death is confronted can the initiate be symbolically resurrected, reborn anew.
To go to sleep in one world and wake up in another.
While the process that is playing out is quite coordinated and sophisticated in reality, it may be executed in a purposefully confusing manner.
Thanks for joining us. I know we're surrounded by uncertainty. It feels like everything is changing.
So that the goalposts seem to keep moving back and forth, up and down, here now there, rendering the initiate unable to find solid mental ground from which to make logical sense of anything.
We're trying to figure out how to do this every week because everything changes constantly.
This disorientation is key. The uncertain timing generates a general anxiety, further removing the initiate from reality and leaving him or her more susceptible to a type of Pavlovian conditioning. This weakens the defenses just as a virus would, only this has the potential to break down the individual much more completely than a virus would.
I know we're surrounded by uncertainty.
Whatever the finer details, the previous way of life is shed like an old skin. At the end that comes before the beginning, the change begins. This is the second phase, the transition.
It's liminal time or liminal space. The word liminal literally means threshold, that we're on a threshold of a new time, a new way of doing things in our society, that there's going to be some transformation.
As the old self symbolically dies and passes away, the initiate descends into a state of liminality, a sort of fever dream purgatory nowhere land, the void in the middle. Thus the old self dies as the initiate is purified. Now a white room, a blank canvas washed and primed and desperate for paint, a tabula rasa. At the same time his old existence and way of life dies, the initiate transcending it is gradually being processed, reprogrammed, and incorporated into his or her new environment.
Because this is going to be transformative. It is going to be transformative on a personal basis, on a social basis, on a systems basis. We're never going to be the same again.
Reformed, reconstituted, and rebirthed into the new world that awaits at the end of the tunnel.
As a society, beyond just this immediate situation, we should start looking forward to understand how this experience is going to change us, or how it should change us.
This is the final phase of the ritual, integration.
And everyone wants to know, is this the new reality?
It's too early to say that we're looking at something closer to a reformation.
We're waking up to the new normal?
When do we get back to normal? I don't think we get back to normal.
This is an extraordinary time where we have to accept a new normal.
Society will undergo a radical transformation. And if you're feeling alone, just remember, we are alone together.
And as a new normal descends, it can feel so solitary. And yet, we're all alone together.
First, we were told that wearing masks would do more harm than good, which is what the science still supports. But now, even as the COVID-19 pandemic is turning out to be less harmful than the seasonal flu, we are being told to wear the mask. Austin, Texas, has threatened a $2,000 fine for those not wearing the mask, and have even suggested that we wear the mask while at home.
We still need people to wear the mask in public. We still need people to keep social distance and isolation. Ryan, the one thing I want to try to get across today is we need to do that when we're in our homes also.
Science tells us that these masks are doing nothing but hurting our natural immune system. So why is it so important that we wear the mask? If one were to look at what is happening as if it were a massive initiation ritual, then things may begin to make more sense. The initiation ritual can be found throughout all of human history. We find it in ancient tribes and religions, all the way up to modern gangs, fraternities, and in the military. Psychological studies have taught us how initiation rituals work, primarily how they increase a person's desire to conform to the group they are being initiated into. The ritual is almost always the same. First, the initiate is isolated. Their familiar everyday routines are disrupted, and their normal rules of living are altered. The initiates are made to look the same. Their heads may be shaved, they may be given matching outfits, or they may be instructed to wear a mask. These techniques symbolically strip the initiate of their unique identity, so they can cease seeing themselves as an individual and begin seeing themselves as part of the group. The wearer of the mask loses his previous identity and assumes a new one. The initiate is then subjected to just enough trauma to put them in a mild state of cognitive dissonance. This dissonance puts the initiate into a state of confusion and anxiety. They are now ready to be transformed into a member of the initiating group. In their isolation, thoughts they have ignored or buried for years suddenly become unavoidable. Emotions are triggered, and a new window of thought is opened within the initiate's mind. And in this state, the new normal is introduced. This worldwide initiation ritual is creating a massive separation in humanity. The obedient and the defiant are being drawn apart like a chemistry purification experiment. And it would seem that the obedient ones are being initiated into something. The new normal, the new age, the new world order. A world where science no longer matters. A world where blind obedience is all that is respected. And if this is a worldwide initiation ritual, then we can certainly expect the obedient initiated to be turned against the rest of us.
Is this speech 217?
See if you can find yourself a seat.
Hello.
I've been thinking about you, and I don't even know your name.
Larry. Larry Crown. Hi. This is,
Lala. Larry and Lala. I don't think so. I used to be Catherine until I looked in the mirror and saw a girl named Talia. You? Lance. Lance Corona.
The Synchromystic presents Synchromystique. You see people in face masks, people wearing scarves, makeshift face masks, surgical masks, N95 masks. BuzzFeed comments on the great face mask debate. National Public Radio weighing in as to whether masks are able to confer any benefits beyond the potential of blocking viruses. See Part 2. Masks can offer visual cues, can serve as reminders, badges, signals that you are willing to do your part. They function to give you security, make you feel like you're wearing a shield. They can also serve as a warning, and they can reinforce the values and the beliefs of the culture. Masks can serve as a reminder. What are we talking about? This is psychology. Aldous Huxley, in a letter to George Orwell, stated that through infant conditioning and narco-hypnosis, people could actually be suggested into loving their servitude. Huxley, of course, the author of Brave New World, and Orwell, the author of 1984, fashionable face masks trying to make something horrific seem appealing. One interviewee made the statement that there is a certain Blade Runner-y feeling of embracing our fashionable dystopia.
Celebrities are proudly wearing face masks amid concerns of the coronavirus spreading worldwide. Gwyneth Paltrow shared a photo of herself on a flight en route to Paris, where she showed off her face mask on Instagram. Paranoid? Prudent? Panicked? Placid? Pandemic? Propaganda? Paltrow's just going to go ahead and sleep with this thing on the plane, the 47-year-old wrote. I've already been in this movie. Stay safe. Don't shake hands. Wash hands frequently, she concluded, referencing her role as Patient Zero in the movie Contagion.
Hey.
Yeah, John Neal here. You left without saying goodbye.
Yeah, it ended up being delayed. So, sorry, I was panicking.
Well, if I don't get to see you again, I just wanted to say it was nice to see you again.
Yeah, it was nice to see you too.
And listen, use that other email I gave you, because that's the only secure one, okay?
Okay.
You alright?
Yeah, I'm just jet-lagged.
Well, you should go home and get some rest. Hong Kong's a long way.
Oh, wait.
Is that you?
Yeah, that's me. They're calling my flight.
All right, well, look, I'm really glad you called.
Thanks.
Bye.
New York Times, of course, the newspaper of record in the United States. In an article titled The Mask, author Vanessa Friedman literally says the surgical mask has become a symbol of our time. However, it has long been a fraught symbol. The face mask is a symbol that hides but also communicates. We're talking about hidden meanings. Masks are everywhere and masks are nowhere. And Friedman says the mask has become the virus's avatar. According to the online etymology dictionary, the avatar has to do with the descent of a deity to Earth in an incarnate form. There is a thought experiment in philosophy and sociology referred to as the Martian scientist or the man from Mars or some variation. And the idea is that we can get an outside-the-box perspective, a view from the outside. This was done to great comic effect by Andy Griffith in his recording What It Was Football, where he represents a simple country preacher happening across a college football game for the very first time and not understanding what he's seeing. The idea is to try and obtain some intellectual distance, some objectivity by trying to suspend the set of assumptions that we normally bring to states of affairs when we perceive them or analyze them. So let us consider a pagan culture. Focus on one pagan, and then we bring her into a present context where people are wearing face masks. Throughout history, masks have had a very big role to play in world religions and spirituality. According to the Penguin Dictionary of Symbols, there are three main uses that one can trace through civilization. Start with carnivals, a Western Christian festive season that occurs before the liturgical season of Lent, which we just came off of. Carnivals are characterized by elaborate costumes, masks, allowing people to set aside their individuality and experience a heightened sense of social unity. The word carnival literally means raising flesh, remove meat, or farewell to the flesh. The last day of one of the most important carnivals is, of course, Mardi Gras, meaning Fat Tuesday, Shrove Tuesday, characterized by people dressing up in ridiculous disguises. Another name for a person who is so dressed is a buffoon, the fool, or the joker. But a mask is also, of course, the name for the false face that one puts on at a carnival. The Iroquois also have false face masks. They're actually intended to cure disease. They have a false face society. Donald Trump recently was in the news, and the allegation was that he had a false face in a picture that was widely circulated in the press. But false face can also have to do with the idea of being two-faced, as in the Greco-Roman god Janus depicted here. Two-faced can have the implication of being hypocritical. Trump in the news, calling the Canadian Prime Minister Trudeau two-faced. In the book Early Modern Women Poets, we read that Rosicrucian texts were always intended to mean one thing to initiates and another to outsiders. Now, the Rosicrucians were a 16th century esoteric movement. For additional details, you can see Mask video number 2. Texts and symbols often have a dual meaning. The New York Times, masks are something that hide but also communicate. They have a dual function. Now, Mardi Gras is intimately connected with the idea of being topsy-turvy. The COVID-19 outbreak has turned life topsy-turvy. Everything turned upside down. Played a role in Disney's The Hunchback of Notre Dame. 1 year ago, almost to the day, Notre Dame Cathedral in France caught fire inexplicably. The date was April the 15th, 2019. Notre Dame Cathedral, and indeed many other cathedrals all throughout Europe, in many ways symbolize Christianity. 1 year after the fire at Notre Dame Cathedral in France, churches are closed at the high holy day of Easter by the coronavirus.
From the ashes, we rise up. We had Ash Wednesday. We want to rise up with Jesus at Easter. And I believe that there'll be some rising from this time.
In her book, Magic and Alchemy, author Rosemary Gilley, summarizing the thoughts of occultist Aleister Crowley, writes that Crowley understood that magic worked forward or backward in time, and that the projection of a magician's will did not necessarily precede the effect. Mardi Gras in 2020 was held on February the 25th. That's 1 day after the Trump administration asked Congress for $1.25 billion for a coronavirus response, and 4 days prior to the U.S. recording its first coronavirus death. Mardi Gras was literally bound up with the beginning of the effects of coronavirus in the United States. New Orleans faces a virus nightmare, and Mardi Gras may be why. New Orleans is a center of coronavirus. Mardi Gras could be to blame. In the media, pointing you back to Mardi Gras. Mardi Gras is connected with masks. Today, everyone wears masks during Mardi Gras. Float riders are required to wear masks by law.
The rule is you can only give a penalty that can be performed in the room.
I'm tired of this game. I don't want to play anymore.
But my penalty! I've got to have a penalty!
I name a penalty. Come on. You can play our little tune in the manner of Johann Sebastian Bach.
The second use of masks is the use of masks in funeral rites. Of course, in ancient Egypt, famous death masks. A modern-day mask, this one from Freemason Albert Pike. In the Illuminati card game, inspired by Robert Anton Wilson's Illuminatus trilogy, the Death Mask card has some interesting text, quoting, "Whoever wears it can see a slightly different world through its staring eye holes, and when the mask is removed, the different world is the true one." End quote. The world after coronavirus, we will inhabit a different world. After the coronavirus passes, your world will not go back to normal. According to BuzzFeed, the world will be different, and so will we. The darker funeral connection: there are no funerals, according to Reuters. Death in quarantine leaves nowhere to grieve. Funerals in Italy have been banned. The third use of masks, the theatrical. Let's turn a glance backward in time. On the musical stage, one of the more significant creations of the great Italian maestro Giuseppe Verdi was his 1859 production Un ballo in maschera, a masked ball. This opera was based on the sensational 1792 assassination of Swedish King Gustav III while at a masked ball. But political sensitivities of the day forced Verdi's libretto to use alternate character names and locations. On a considerably less ominous a basis and veering off into sheer fun is Eine Nacht in Venedig, A Night in Venice, the 1883 operetta that dedicated fans of Johann Strauss Jr. think rivals his more famous Die Fledermaus in terms of melodic exuberance. It is in the first act that the philandering Duke of Urbino hopes to impress the beauteous Barbara at the grand masked ball held at Carnival each year at his palace. Strauss sets the scene with one of his most infectious waltzes, sung by the four principals and a full orchestra. Of course, alles maskiert, that is, all are masked. One of the most popular works of the Soviet-era composer Akram Khachaturian has been his Masquerade, incidental music to an 1835 play by that name by the Russian writer Mikhail Lermontov, staged in Moscow in 1941. What was of strange interest in the creation of the original play is that government censorship delays forced many rewrites by Lermontov to the point where he gave it up unproduced. The key part of the rather convoluted plot revolves around a masquerade party at an aristocratic mansion in which the hero, one Arbenin, falsely concludes that his wife Nina had been unfaithful to him with another man while all were at the masked ball. Arbenin kills his wife and then goes mad with grief when he realizes his error. It later emerged that the reason for the official obstruction was that the negative portrayal of masked balls as places of criminality implied criticism of a prominent family of St. Petersburg who were given to holding such affairs. Stanley Kubrick's Eyes Wide Shut is worth mentioning. There are numerous scenes involving masks in the movie. But one of the most celebrated literary evocations of masks, however, is the famed Man in the Iron Mask saga out of 17th century France. His identity to this day is unknown, or at least not known for sure, but he was literally imprisoned in a variety of prisons for over 3 decades. Now, even though he's known as the Man in the Iron Mask, in the article On the Trail of the Iron Mask, we read that he was actually masked with a black velvet mask. Maybe he had stay-at-home orders during a coronavirus outbreak. Similar mask worn by singer Billie Eilish. Man in the Iron Mask was actually made into a Hollywood production featuring Leonardo DiCaprio, Jeremy Irons, John Malkovich, Gerard Depardieu, and Gabriel Byrne. Christopher Nolan's Batman trilogy is worthy of note. Not only was Batman masked in order, according to the story, to protect his friends, the villain in The Dark Knight Rises was also a masked man, Bane. One of the actors who acted in The Dark Knight Rises, one Jay Benedict, has reportedly died from coronavirus. Now, Trump has a number of different connections with masks. According to the left-leaning Conversation, Donald Trump's orange face may be funny, but this tanning historian says it masks something deeper. Protesters of Donald Trump wear orange paint like a war mask. According to The Guardian, why is Donald Trump obsessed with Bane? According to several news sources, Donald Trump's inauguration speech borrowed lines from Batman's villain. Trump told the crowd, "We are transferring power from Washington, D.C. and giving it back to you, the people. Anne Bain, on the steps of Gotham's Blackgate prison, stated, "We take Gotham from the corrupt, the rich, the oppressors of generations who have kept you down with myths of opportunity, and we give it to you, the people."
And giving it back to you, the people.
And we give it back to you, the people.
Do you guys know what this represents?
Tell us, sir.
Maybe it's the calm before the storm.
What's the storm?
Could be the calm before the storm.
There's a storm coming, Mr. Wayne.
But what's interesting is the presentation of it in the media. The media is drawing our attention to The Dark Knight. After Bane delivered those comments, the prison was open and the prisoners were free all across the United States. As a result of the coronavirus, we find that inmates are being released from jails and even inmates being released from prisons. In some cases, reportedly convicted felons being released in the name of coronavirus. But I would be remiss if I didn't mention one of the most direct literary parallels that I can think of, Edgar Allan Poe's Masque of the Red Death. The story follows Prince Prospero's attempts to avoid a dangerous plague known as the Red Death by hiding in his abbey. So the story follows a wealthy person hiding from a disease in his home. He throws a masquerade ball, death enters, disguised, and, spoiler alert, everyone dies. This was made into a Hollywood movie starring Vincent Price.
Drop them.
No, I beg of you! Mercy, mercy!
Lord Satan, send me a demon, so I may know I'm to be your wife.
I want to help save your soul so you can join me in the glories of hell.
No, never!
Diamonds, rubies, emeralds, pearls!
Each man creates his own heaven, his own hell.
Let me see your face.
Consortium news, COVID-19, the American Mask of Death. M-A-S-Q-U-E. This spelling of mask actually also has an additional tie-in, and that is that mask spelled this way was a form of festive courtly entertainment that flourished in 16th and 17th century Europe. Often the maskers, who did not speak or sing, were courtiers. In other words, they were the stars of the time. And they list here various kings and queens. In our time, this coronavirus mask has starred, in part, Prince Charles. It's often said that our celebrity culture is a kind of a royalty, but would you believe that certain celebrities reportedly have links to royalty? And one of them is actor Tom Hanks, supposedly descendant of King John. Tom Hanks is of interest not just because, as an actor, he has played the role of a symbologist in several high-profile films, but also because Tom Hanks and Rita Wilson shared that they tested positive for coronavirus. But now he feels better. Time magazine wants you to understand that Tom Hanks is a guiding light in the time of coronavirus. Time thinks quite a lot of Tom Hanks. Vanessa Friedman states that the masks that we wear have turned everyone into a muzzled pelican. I find this extremely bizarre language. When I look up pictures of pelicans just to make sure that I had it straight in my mind, it's not completely outlandish. It's certainly not an obvious comparison. I wouldn't have thought to make that comparison. And even now that she has made it, honestly, I don't know how apt it is. So it occurs to me that she may have had another reason. Now, I have no idea if Vanessa Friedman is familiar with alchemy, but in fact, pelicans are one of the 5 birds, so-called, in alchemy. According to the book The Alchemy Key, written by one Stuart Nettleton, alchemists call their vessels pelicans. An alchemist doing certain of his or her works operate on a vessel that is referred to as a pelican. At least that's one of the vessels. There are others. Here's a picture of that particular vessel. There is something called a volatilization. So you have to picture various chemical reactions going on in various of these vessels. Some of these are symbolized as a pelican feeding its young with its own blood. Now, where do they get that? Well, we can turn to T.H. White's A Book of Beasts, which is a modern reprinting of a medieval bestiary. Bestiary was a book that basically represented all of what was known or believed about animals at the time, and much of it was legendary. So we can see here Pelicanus. The pelican is excessively devoted to its children, but when these have been born and begin to grow up, they flap their parents in the face with the wings, and the parents striking back kill them. 3 days afterward, the mother pierces her own breast, opens her side, and lays herself across her young, pouring out her blood over the dead bodies, bringing them to life again. The idea of the pelican piercing its breast shows up in this print. Now you can see a number of symbolic elements, but we'll notice just a few things. First of all, you've got the letters INRI across the bottom. Now, we just came from the Easter season, from the Passion of Jesus Christ, and across the top of the crucifix is often emblazoned the letters INRI. Now, they have a different signification in occult circles than they do in Christianity. We see the pelican piercing her breast to feed her young ones. We see a compass, a symbol of Freemasonry. We see the rose and the cross, which is a symbol of Rosicrucianism. And remembering that corona is the Latin word for crown, look at the thing at the very top. We have a crown, we have a corona. So we have a very interesting emblem of this entire coronavirus fiasco in this picture right here. Now, the meaning of the pelican in Freemasonry is that it stands for the secret work by which man is raised. Earlier, we looked at the word carnival and said that it meant raising flesh. And what does it mean to be raised? Well, in Masonry, when a candidate has received the 3rd degree, he is said to have been raised to the degree of a Master Mason by going through the ordeal of the initiation.
From the ashes, we rise up. We had Ash Wednesday. We want to rise up with Jesus at Easter. And I believe that there'll be some rising from this dying.
Spirit, I will rise from the ashes of defeat. Rise from the ashes.
Couple of interesting Pelican connections. First of all, the state of Louisiana. The Pelicans are the professional basketball team for New Orleans. And we talked about New Orleans earlier being the center of coronavirus and possibly Mardi Gras being to blame. From the online etymology dictionary, we have an interesting connection between pelican and the albatross. So notice albatross is an alteration of Alcatraz and originally referred to a pelican. In the rhyme of the Ancient Mariner, a sailor shoots an albatross and then has to wear one. The Alcatraz prison island off of San Francisco Bay is named for pelicans, or storm birds. Dennis Houck, writing in The Complete Idiot's Guide to Alchemy, states that the pelican stands for the distillation operation as well as the beginning of the red phase of alchemy. The red phase refers to the rubedo, or the reddening portion of the magnum opus, that is the great work. That can be delineated a couple of ways. One is in the 4-stage view, you have the blackening phase, the whitening phase, the yellowing phase, and then the reddening phase. But in the 3-stage view, the yellowing and the reddening are compressed into one. So the albedo is, so to speak, the daybreak, but not until the rubedo is it sunrise. And the transition between the two is formed by the citrinitas. This is according to the article Alchemical Process and Its Stages. Now I get into citrinitas in the previous video, but the upshot here is that the pelican is the symbol that we're moving into the rubedo stage, the final stage of the magnum opus. In the book Myths of the Afterlife, Anna Marie Hemingway states that during the Renaissance, many alchemists viewed the metaphor of the transformation of lead into gold as symbolizing the emergence of divinity within the human being. In other words, alchemy has to do with transformation. It has to do with the transformation of human beings. Lead into gold was seen by many just as a metaphor. It was another layer of symbol, if you will. The actual alchemical process is applied to human beings. And look at the language. Again, we go back to the New York Times article. Masks had a double function. Number one, to stop germs. But look at the second function, to transform people, to be scientifically minded citizens. The activation or the realization of some kind of divinity. The serpent commenting to Eve that if she ate from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, her eyes would be opened and she would be like God. Now this is sometimes referred to as the fall of man, but it's also sometimes referred to as the curse of Eve, and just by sheer synchronicity, I stumbled across this silent film, now lost, titled The Curse of Eve, and I wasn't even going to put it in there. Would you believe that this movie was produced by the Corona Cinema Company? Encyclopedia Britannica, in an article titled The Functions and Forms of Masks, lets us know that sometimes masks are used and reserved for initiations. If we are entering into a final stage of alchemy, if we are being initiated, if we are being raised in some way occultically, what are we being initiated into? What are we being raised to?
The question I want to ask is about St. Mary's and Three Waters. The question that's kept me up for the last 24 hours, the question I have to ask is, what if the worst, the most horrifying biological attack in this country's history was not the work of religious extremists?
Well, I don't understand. We know it was. They were caught. They confessed.
And they were executed, I know. And maybe that's really what happened. But I see this chain of events, these coincidences, and I have to ask, what if that isn't what happened? What if someone else unleashed that virus? What if someone else killed all those people? Would you really want to know who it was?
Sure.
Even if it was someone working for this government? That's my question. If our own government was responsible for what happened at St. Mary's, and Three Waters. If our own government was responsible for the deaths of almost 100,000 people, would you really want to know?
Our story begins, as these stories often do, with a young up-and-coming politician. He's a deeply religious man and a member of the Conservative Party. He's completely single-minded and has no regard for the political process. The more power he attains, the more obvious his zealotry and the more aggressive his supporters become. Eventually, his party launches a special project in the name of national security. At first, it's believed to be a search for biological weapons, and it's pursued without regard to its cost. However, the true goal of this project is power, complete and total hegemonic domination. The project, however, ends violently. But the efforts of those involved are not in vain, for a new ability to wage war is born from the blood of one of the victims. Imagine a virus, the most terrifying virus you can, and then imagine that you and you alone have the cure. But if your ultimate goal is power, how best to use such a weapon? It's at this point in our story that along comes a spider. He is a man seemingly without a conscience, for whom the ends always justify the means, and it is he who suggests that their target should not be an enemy of the country, but rather the country itself. 3 targets are chosen to maximize the effect of the attack: a school, a tube station, and a water treatment plant. Several hundred die within the first few weeks.
That Three Waters has, in fact, been contaminated.
Authorities are attempting to control its deadly spread.
Sent a wave of destruction throughout the underground.
Fueled by the media, fear and panic spread quickly, fracturing and dividing the country until at last the true goal comes into view. The true genius of the plan was the fear. Fear became the ultimate tool of this government, and through it, our politician was ultimately appointed to the newly created position of High Chancellor. The rest, as they say, is history.
Should I say that our father? I kind of think that I'm included me.
So, Dr. Newman, you're saying that everybody wears a mask?
That's correct, Wendy. We all wear masks, metaphorically speaking. We suppress the id, our darkest desires, and adopt a more socially acceptable image.
Well, the book is, of course, The Masks We Wear by Dr. Arthur Newman. Thank you so much for being with us today.
This is an interesting piece, Mr. Ipkiss. Looks like 4th or 5th century Scandinavian. Possibly a representation of one of the Norse night gods. Maybe Loki.
Loki? Who's Loki?
The Norse god of mischief. Supposedly he caused so much trouble that Odin banished him from Valhalla forever.
Then he could have banished him into that mask.
I'm talking about mythology, Mr. Ipkiss. This is a piece of wood.
But your book...
My book is about masks as a metaphor, Mr. Ipkiss. A metaphor, not to be taken literally. You're suffering from a mild delusion.
Oh, all right. I'm going to prove it to you. That I am not responsible for the consequences. Just sit back and enjoy the ride, Mr. Expert.
You don't scare me, Mr. Ipkiss. Go right ahead.
See ya.
It's just a mask, you guys. Don't be a jerk. It's for the greater good. It's just a vaccine, you guys. Don't be a jerk. It's for the greater good. In 4 months, the U.S. was transformed into an obedient socialist country. Government dictated what events are acceptable to attend. Violent protests that instill fear are okay. But church services, family funerals, and patriotic celebrations are dangerous. And you bought it without a fight. Standing in a graduation line is a safety hazard. Small businesses were forced to close, but crowds to support the corporate money machine at Walmart, Lowe's, and Home Depot are okay. Come on! It's just a mask. And safety precautions. How about a little hush money? Here's $2,400 that we stole out of your paycheck in the first place. Enjoy. Buy something with it from a big corporation. Cash is dirty. We can't give change. There's a coin shortage. Use your card. In 4 months, they convince you to use a traceable card for everything. In less than 4 months, government closed public schools, then restructured education under the guise of public safety. In less than 4 months, our government demonstrated how easily people assimilate to guidelines that have no scientific premise whatsoever when you are fearful.
Ron Howard was spotted leaving LAX earlier this month wearing a surgical mask for protection. Luckily for Ron's waiting fans, the 65-year-old took his mask off to chat and sign autographs. But experts warn that surgical masks aren't actually effective in protecting against the illness. Instead, the CDC recommends staying home, frequent hand washing, and avoiding touching nose, eyes, and mouth as the best ways to prevent contracting coronavirus.
Well, and you've talked about, along with other epidemiologists, other scientists, other doctors, Dr. Fauci, Dr. Gottlieb, people that have devoted their entire lives to following pandemics. You've been warning about what happened in the fall, what was going to happen when the flu season collided with this pandemic. Donald Trump, of course, several months ago said it was going to be gone by the fall. Nobody, no scientist or doctor that I've spoken to agrees. And do you still believe that the fall could actually be the most catastrophic time for us because the flu season is going to collide with this pandemic?
Yeah, well, first of all, we're going to see an explosion of cases in September just related to the reopening of colleges, universities, and high schools. So that's going to be the next kind of big fire line that we're going to have to deal with. The second thing is it's indoor air. Influenza may or may not be a challenge this year. We're hardly seeing any of it in the Southern Hemisphere right now. But I can tell you for certain indoor air is going to be a huge challenge. The more we're together inside, the more we're together with people, we're going to see major transmission issues, these kind of super spreading events that we see. So I do see the fall as being a kind of coronavirus on steroids time period for this country. And that's why we have put forward our plan to say, you know, pay me now or pay me later. If we lock down, get better control like these other countries have done, where they could basically live with the virus in a very different way than we are right now, the only answer, the fall is going to be a challenge.
Parts of the country that are now instituting new mandatory mask regulations. Washington State and North Carolina among the latest. According to our new ABC News poll with Ipsos, 9 out of 10 Americans say they've worn a mask in public in the last week, but there's some partisan divide. 99% of Democrats compared to 79% of Republicans say they've worn a face covering. Matt Gutman is in Los Angeles with more on the mask division across the country. Good morning, Matt.
Hey, good morning, Michael. And somehow wearing a mask has become this political flashpoint, even though doctors at hospitals like this remind us that the purpose of these masks is to protect others from our germs. And that's one reason that an increasing number of governors across the country are making wearing these mandatory, as increasing number of their constituents are rebelling against it.
Are you going to allow the government to tell you you have to wear a mask?
You could call it a mask mutiny.
Wearing a mask can actually cause you to get sick. So
wearing a mask can actually cause you to get sick.
Yes, absolutely.
And a new model from the University of Washington estimates around 33,000 lives could be saved by October 1st if nearly everyone begins to wear a mask.
Americans will be wearing masks for several years. This is coming from a researcher at Johns Hopkins University. In a recent interview, he predicts wearing facial coverings will become the new normal. His statements come as an uptick of positive cases continues across the country. Latest numbers show 42 states are seeing an increase of infections. He adds that being outside and social distancing will help dramatically reduce transmissions.
What you just said is one of the most insanely idiotic things I have ever heard. At no point in your rambling, incoherent response were you even close to anything that could be considered a rational thought. Everyone in this room is now dumber for having listened to it. I award you no points, and may God have mercy on your soul.